workshop for the City of North St. Paul for October 19th. Jenny, if you take the roll.
Councilmember Thorson?
Here.
Councilmember Peterson?
Here.
Councilmember Wong?
Here.
Mayor Furlong?
Here.
And Mayor Cole, excuse me, Councilmember Cole is absent.
We do have a quorum. Motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Thorson,
Second.
second by Councilmember Peterson. Any discussion? Not all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We have 3 topics. And the first one is the Arts and Culture Commission introduction. And so I'd like to welcome the commission. If you want to just come on up, Tom, that'd be. If you want to be there.
Right here?
Yep, that'd be great. I was going to say, even if you guys want to bring up chairs, you can sit if you want. Good to see you guys again.
Hi, yeah, good to be back. Great. So the purpose of us being here is to just, we wanted to introduce who we had. We thought we would have a couple more today. One person is sick. And just kind of give you an idea about the direction that we're heading and make sure that we're aligned with what you're thinking as a council too. So, I mean, the Arts and Culture Commission is just kind of an arm of the city council in how it's created. So we just want to make sure we're aligned, and that's part of our direction, is to make sure we're connecting with all intergovernmental groups as we go too. So we'll start. Here's our little presentation that we have. So start by just introducing everybody. I'm Tom, Chair. Trudy Onsorg, who is not here, said she's coming upstairs right now. There she is.
Started the meeting too early.
Yeah. Trudy Onsorg, our co-chair. Just in time, Trudy. And then Julie Barrett, who is not here right now. Stacy Maher here, and also Carrie Netto, who is, rhymes with meadow.
Good job.
Yeah, thank you. So we've been just thrilled, and I know Councilmember Wong and Mayor Furlong were involved in the interviews for our commissioners, and, just thrilled with the level of interest and talent that we had show up for those interviews. So really happy with the people that we have on the commission. So, and it's been a fun group, very engaged, and nobody in this group is afraid of talking, and we get into it, so it's fun. So I want to just kind of run through this. So what we did first of all was kind of come up with a statement of purpose. Why do we even exist? And what we settled on was what we have here: to inspire connection and community through the development of public art and cultural expression. There was a lot of reasoning behind that, but first of all, and something that I hadn't even been really thinking of myself in starting this, I was thinking, well, let's get some murals going on downtown and some sculptures or something. And with this group, we really talked a lot about expressing the community, the culture of the community through any kind of art installations that we would involve, or other things that we do. And again, from what I had said from the get-go was I didn't really see this as having a focus in the performing arts, but we're not in any way excluding that. So if somewhere down the line that were to be something that this commission wanted to get into, we could. But we're really trying to build it for the long haul. So we're really taking a thoughtful, methodical approach to how we're putting this together. So if you want to go to the next slide, Carrie. So what we did is we had 4 directional statements. So how do we deliver on that statement of purpose that we laid out there? And we figured there were really 4 critical elements that we needed for this. That's the broad collaborative representation. So who is being represented in the work that's being done here? How are we getting the voices of the community involved? The next thing was to have sustainable funding sources. So obviously, you can't have an arts commission and have all these great ideas and not have any money to do it. So we're going to be coming at you, council members, to say, hey, how do we get some of this into the budget? But also probably far more than what comes out of the city budget will be what we look at in grant writing and other funding sources as well. So Arts and Legacy Fund is always the one that kind of pops to mind first of all there. The third element that we have are, exceptional and engaging artists and ideas. So what exactly are we going to do and who will do that? And as we break that down a little bit, I'll talk about how we've talked about these don't all have to be established artists. They don't all have to be local artists, but they could also be residents, using the residents in the community to build art. And then finally, the other element that's really important is having clear bylaws and procedures. Some of that's outlined in the expectations from statute, but also we want to be really clear with ourselves on what does it mean for us to choose a project. How do we go about doing that? What gets prioritized? And how do we choose the people who would work on that? So how does the whole system work? So if we go to the next slide, just breaking these down quickly, broad collaborative representation, like I said, we want to make sure that we're engaging people in the community in many different ways. So it could be schools, churches, youth groups, residents at large, seniors, the green team, higher education, whatever it is. And then business community support. How do we connect with the Business Association, Chamber of Commerce, the Rotary Club, et cetera. And then we have intergovernmental connectivity. So by and large, that really means our North St. Paul government, the council, but then also other commissions. So we see there's an opportunity here to work with the Planning Commission, opportunity, of course, to work with Parks and Rec. So we want to make sure that we're connecting with them as well. We're meeting with the Planning and EDA this Thursday, and then Parks and Rec next week as well. And then external research and guidance, how can we learn from others who have done this before? So, you can see there's a lot of work there to just establish who we are. So the next thing on sustainable funding sources, really, we're going to be digging into state and local funds, business funds. Are there businesses? I don't always want to single out Love Ice Cream, but Susanna's always said that she wanted to have a mural on her building. It's like, okay, well, how can we work with you to help make that happen and share the cost of that? But so business funds, those types of things. And then other fundraising, ad hoc, some sustained fundraising, and then also in the annual budget planning process. So, in our third one, exceptional and engaging artists and ideas. This is where we're really trying to talk about, well, what are the project types that we want to do? Who are the people that would do those the artists? And what are the locations? So we really kind of start to look at the city as kind of a canvas. And where do we see that there's opportunity to bring things to life in a way to kind of express the culture of the people of the city? So finally, the clear bylaws and procedures. We need to have standards for ourselves. So what are the membership and role expectations, meeting cadence and routine? And then how do we communicate? Internally, how do we communicate with residents, et cetera? And then project selection, a big one, like I had mentioned earlier, and funding allocation. So how do we determine where to put the money first and that type of thing? So I'm kind of blowing through a lot of stuff here, but want to see if anybody had any thoughts or questions about that approach so far.
I think it's a good, direction for the group of putting all that together, and you got a clean slate pretty much downtown, and
Yeah.
clean slate in the city, because we've never really had this kind of talk before in regards to what our opportunities are for this to happen. Maybe Councilmember Wong she's the liaison for it, and I think having her on board too, she might bring a little, maybe want to say a few words in regards to kind of what your ideas or what you see in the commission.
Yeah, I think, the commission has obviously, a team of brilliant people, and I think, you've highlighted some really great aspects in terms of engaging the community and different folks, either professionally or even just residents, to get engaged in the arts, and I think that is really critical and foundational
Yeah.
It's pretty clear and the excitement is there, so I think you'll provide us with some great direction.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yeah, well, I think we gave you a little seed money, Tom. A little seed money.
Good, good.
What was
Thanks.
that?
Didn't we give them like some seed money?
Yep.
Yeah, so, I mean, you got something.
We got some.
You got something.
Great.
No, I'm excited about this. I know former Councilwoman Jan Wasluck was, had something, not on this scale, but then it kind of died down, so I'm glad we kind of, it was like a phoenix, we can
Yeah.
resurrect, but it sounds very good. I like your goals. I think they're all achievable, and I'll back you 100%, so.
Good, thank
you and the committee, thanks.
Councilmember Thorson?
Yeah, you mentioned the murals, and that's, I guess, more of a direct question I have, and maybe at this point you're not ready to answer that, but if a business in town wanted to explore utilizing sides or their entire building for murals, what would the process be? Does it need to get approval from the city? And if there is some sort of cost sharing you're envisioning that perhaps, or at least you could be that first step to say, hey, I'm looking at doing this, but I don't know any mural artists or whatever, you guys could recommend people and
Right.
things like that.
Yeah, so the short answer is, I don't have the answer yet. I mean, I think you're gonna be thinking, like, especially in that bylaws and procedures area, I mean, that's just something we'll have to figure out, so what do we do? I think we are the first stop, hopefully, so if there's a business that has sort of, a wall they wanna do something on, we'd love it if they came to us and said, how do we do this? Because we could then help them. So we need to figure out what that process looks like ourselves. What does our involvement look like? Do we partner with them on the cost? Like, it's something that benefits them because it's on their building and maybe it draws attention or whatever. So do they pay half of it or whatever? And then it benefits the city by, bringing attention to the city and beautifying the city in some way. So do we pay for half, or how exactly does that work? So all of that we have to figure out, but yeah, it's a really good question because all of those details are gonna be important.
I don't know if you heard, but we have a new restaurant coming in downtown.
I have heard, yes.
So Brandon is going to resurrect the Max, the old.
I heard that,
diners
yeah.
Type of thing. And we found the old sign that was in the old Max restaurant. Gary Mulcahy had it in one of his warehouses.
Wow,
So he's gonna resurrect that sign, and as you go into the restaurant, you're probably gonna see the iconic.
it's awesome.
The old Max sign, which is kind of art, it's kind of.
Yeah.
Like in Vegas, they have the neon park,
Yeah,
which is really
right.
Cool. They preserve all the old neons and everything, so it'd be kind of neat to see the, preservation of the old Max sign. And then he also had some booths from the Max Diner.
Really?
He's gonna
Oh, that's
look at
great.
putting those in there, that maybe waiting area or something, so, he might be someone to reach out to in regards
Yeah.
to, maybe he wants to do some art inside or, some more
Yeah.
stuff. Or-
Now we just need some of those old cooks to come.
Right. But yeah, no, I'm all excited because, this is something that we've talked about for years.
Yeah, it's great, and I think that, the North St. Paul Pride, I mean, people who live here are proud of living here. I mean, we take a lot of pride in our city, and whether you're, multi-generational family or you're new, so, I mean, I think there are people here on our commission who haven't been in North St. Paul that long, but really love the city and recognize what's here. And so I think we want to help kind of express that to anybody that comes around, who is this city and where have we been? There's historical aspects, things like that. So yeah, we're excited. We actually had to start a list of ideas because of course you get a bunch of creative people. They're creative, I'm not creative, but they get these creative people together and everyone's coming up with these ideas of things that we can do. And it's like, that's great, write it down. But first we gotta get our act together and make sure we have a foundation to build on. So you can't just start doing stuff. We don't have money, we don't have any processes, we don't have any plans. We have to figure out all that stuff out first. And then we're looking forward to, you know, getting things rolling. So as Trudy mentioned, we want to have a couple of home runs out of the gate, you know, in 2022, and then pick up some steam from there, so.
Do you see the opportunity for grants more so than in the past? It seems like in the last year or so, I've been seeing more and more of potential grants for artists and, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah, Carrie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I did do some looking into some federal and state and local grants, and it's very different now with COVID. A lot of them are very focused on getting organizations back on their feet or artists back on their feet as a result of COVID. So a little harder finding things specifically for us, but we do have a couple leads that we're going to look into. So I'm excited. I think there are opportunities.
Good, good, yeah. Well, it's great to see all you, and I'm glad it's,
Yeah, we have two questions for you. So to end this, you know, we wanted to just get your advice on a couple of things, you know, and just, again, we want to make sure we're aligned. You know, the first question is, how do you think the city can benefit from the Arts and Culture Commission? You know, when you think about this, what do you think? What do you see? And then also, what would you advise us for how we move forward? So either or both of those questions, if anybody on the council would be interested in giving us your thoughts, we'd appreciate it.
anybody? I think you got my, you know, my backing in regards to, you know, how the benefit for the city is that we're kind of redefining, you know, the downtown and kind of where we live now. And I think having an art aspect into that adds more value to our city. I think that's one way. Anybody else?
I'd like to be a destination instead of a drive-by, you know, let's all go to Stillwater on 36, you know. But
Yeah.
if we had something to show, I mean, we have a lot, but I mean, like a mural or an activity that you would be doing, that would be wonderful, you know. So anything you can, you know, any kind of projects or, would be good. Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, you know, art is pretty subjective, and, you know, I don't really consider myself to be artistic or artsy, but, you know, when I think of things that stick with me, I just was recently on a road trip to down south in Charleston, South Carolina, pretty old town, and driving through the south, I did notice these small towns you drive through, there were murals on the side of old buildings, and it just resonates with you. And, you know, when you think of North St. Paul, the first thing that comes to my mind is the Snowman and Newman's, and, you know, the car show and those sorts of things growing up here, just playing sports and whatnot. So, you know, I'm sure that you guys can do some in-depth looking and make recommendations to people who are looking to maybe engage in that kind of stuff and just kind of make our city more unique and draw attention to downtown and businesses and things like that.
That's great. Anything you think we should watch out for, or any bits of advice you could give us as we move forward?
I think, you know, when we did the banners on the poles, on the electrical poles
Yeah.
or whatever, that was supposed to be kind of a temporary thing, you know, so it's something that can be interchanged.
Uh-huh.
You know, so that's something that, you know, possibly that could be changed within the next couple of years.
Okay.
I'm also thinking those electrical boxes everywhere. I think I know somebody who might know where all of them are.
Trying to get Brian to get rid of them, but he just won't do that.
But I think that's a great low-hanging fruit that would add a lot of interest and conversation in the community.
Any thoughts from our interim city manager, Brian?
Yeah, I was curious, do you have like any kind of public involvement, whether or not it's, I don't know, classes or, you know, just interest in the creativity of the general public or citizens as well?
Great question, and that is something that we included in our planning. So when we look back at, you know, broad collaboration and representation, that's what we're really thinking about. How do we involve the community? And we want the community involved a lot, not just in, hey, here's a survey, what do you think? But,
Yeah.
hey, do you want to come and do something? Do you want to come and paint something, be part of a project?
That'd be awesome.
Because I think that just creates better ownership and buy-in of it.
I think so too.
But as far as like things like classes, certainly possible, you know.
I mean, even at the city here, I know that there's a lot of creative people. His wife, for one, and she's really
Yeah, I know.
creative as well.
I know.
so-
She showed up at our first meeting. I'm like, where did she
Yeah.
come from? I asked Ronnie where he'd been hiding her.
Yeah.
No, so just great group of people on this commission. Everybody's really passionate about the subject, so it's great.
It has a lot of potential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Photo op.
Anyway,
And we talked about the snowman too, something, what is that gonna look like, and
yeah.
how do you brand, and, we do, my vision's a little snowman around town.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, so.
So we want you to know overall that we're taking a very methodical approach to this. We're building it for the long run. But we also want to make sure that we are aligned with this council every step of the way. So we will continue to check back in anytime there is something that needs your approval or anything like that. But it'll take a little while before we really start pumping out some projects, but
But
we're
we just
excited.
started in September. I think this is pretty good.
This is
for
pretty
just
good.
a
Yeah,
couple
that's
months.
Yeah.
very good,
So
very good.
I agree.
we can only go up.
All right, well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Appreciate the time.
thank you all, and good luck, and
Thank you.
look forward to our next meeting.
Yeah.
All right. Second topic is the COVID operational plan. Turn over to city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, we started this conversation the last workshop, discussed several ideas. We did have an employee that had COVID and during our last meeting. We actually had one more employee that has had COVID since that time. So it's here, and I think it's a good time and good conversation to have just to see where you're at and what kind of policies we want to follow up on. I actually am going to turn this over to Dan, who has done a little background with it, and I'll probably follow up when he's done.
Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. If you remember, on October 5th, we kind of first introduced the discussion on the COVID operational plan. How do we react to COVID as it's moving forward, especially as the mandates have ended and so forth. And there was a direction that was given from the city council to kind of go out and look at the League of Minnesota Cities, because there's a lot of information that's out there, a lot of questions and answers. I spent a considerable amount of time going through and looking at the questions and the answers. And as I look at this problem, it kind of goes from, we can take a very strong stance. You can go all the way to the part where we're making mandates on masks, mandates on vaccinations, or we could go to the other extreme and do nothing. I really don't believe that nothing is an option for us. And part of it is that OSHA has, the regulations of workplace safety. So we need to have something in place for our staff, our employees, and for the residents who come here looking, for services. And so what has been kind of drafted up was kind of it's more of a middle of the ground, but for us to try to highly encourage our employees to get vaccinated, to continue to use masking and social distancing, and then also be a good employer in allowing our employees to utilize special time. When the federal mandate underneath the CARES Act had come out, there was 80 hours that were given to employees to use for a variety of things that were related to COVID. That sunsetted at the end of last year. Part of this is looking at, part of this operational plan is looking at allowing individuals who still have a balance in that COVID plan to continue to use that, maybe allow some who maybe don't have enough sick, maybe they're a newer employee, to go negative in their sick balance. Part of what it is a cultural shift. I know for myself, I've been in the workforce for many years, and I'm not going to tell you how many years. But part of it is when you had a sniffle, you had a cold, or you weren't feeling well, our culture kind of dictated to us to come to work. be at work. We're living in different times right now. And when I look around at the workforce that we have today, everybody's very busy. And if we were to have somebody come in and expose the whole entire workforce and we were out, let's say 50%, I wonder how we would be able to provide the services to the city, and that's our ultimate goal. And so I think the operational plan that we're gonna kind of walk through is kind of middle of the ground, or middle of the ground on this, so to speak, but yet it really highly encourages and shows that we're a very supportive employer for our staff here. And we're encouraging them, based upon the CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health, that if they're, if they have symptoms, to stay home. If they've been exposed, to follow the CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health guidelines. And we do need to start encouraging people to wear masks and to have that, separation. We could go to the extent of making a mandatory vaccination. There's just a lot of issues and problems. I was reading through the League of Minnesota Cities, and it kept resonating to me. It's, the answers would be, yes, a city does have the authority to do that. Here are some other things that you need to consider. And then it would always end with, and please contact your attorney. And I'm thinking, by the end of this, for the organization that we have, that we would end up having to have 3 offices and have attorneys there all the time to deal potentially with some issues that are tails to having a vaccination policy. And the same as we potentially could have for masking, but more on the vaccination if we were to do a mandating. And then there's a whole component there that we would need to have some sort of way or system to be able to track who has been vaccinated. They would end up having to show us proof. And to make sure that they're now, as boosters are becoming available, that they're keeping up on their boosters and so forth. So it becomes so complicated, and every time that you implement something of some sort of tracking of any type of data, you end up with potential legal issues. You end up with costs that are associated with being able to do that, and staff time and resources to be able to handle those. So what we've got today to kind of present is again kind of middle of the ground, what we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure the safety of our community, our elected officials and staff, and the operational policy really kind of goes through that. We need to educate our employees and get information out on our website to familiarize themselves, and it's really to have links to the CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health that they understand what the symptoms are of COVID, and that that we do highly recommend that our employees get vaccinated, that we highly recommend that they mask indoors. We're just starting to enter into the winter season. I hate to say that W word out loud, but I think it's coming upon us pretty quick, which means that we're going to be forced more indoors. We're going to be in more close proximity with one another than we have in the luxury of this spring and the summer. We are currently in a high transmission area, and the recommendation is that when you're indoors, in indoor settings, that if you're in a substantial or high transmission, that you wear a mask. And even if we were not in those high levels of transmission, we should encourage individuals to wear a mask during this time period. And again, the social distancing components to it. And then off of the CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health websites, these are the current recommendations. And again, this is something that we're going to have to monitor on a regular basis as things change. Right now, numbers in this last week have become a little bit more positive than they have in the previous month. Yet, again, we're going to be heading into the winter months where we're forced to be more indoors. They can change. We may make recommendations back to the city council to strengthen this operational plan up. And you know, it may end up someday coming to the point where we are making mask mandates for our employees. But I don't think we're at that point right now today. So it'll tell what employees that are fully vaccinated against COVID-19, what they should be looking for if they're, you know, if they do not feel sick or they have symptoms. If they do feel sick or they have symptoms, it'll kind of prescribe what the procedure is for them. It has for the employees not fully vaccinated against COVID-19, what's being recommended now today for them, whether they're in close contact with somebody who's been tested positive or not, or if they have symptoms. And I think we need to get this information out to our employees. We need to follow it from a management standpoint and enforce it with our employees. Part of this, we've kind of developed the workplace exposure and the notification protocols, and it really is going to, immediate, for our employees to know that they need to immediately notify their direct supervisors and let them know what is happening. Some of the other workplace accommodations that we need to look at, no different than a year ago, is their abilities to work remotely. Is there abilities to stagger shifts? In other words, trying to minimize, mass groups being together all at once. Space is a big important part to it, and that we need to continue as an employer to provide cleaning supplies and PPE, personal protective equipment for our employees and for guests that come to our facilities. And then there's the pandemic leave component to it, and that is what's being written right now is kind of looking at that if anybody has any time left of their 80-hour bank leave, or if they're a new employee, that they would get an 80-hour bank leave to be able to utilize for COVID-related illnesses according to the prior guidelines that were just looked at briefly. And then, employees can use, also could use vacation, their own sick, and then also allow them to go into a negative balance to keep them, to be able to make it through this pandemic. I spoke with a number of staff just to try to get their kind of sense and feel where they were at. And there was alarmingly to me that there was a lot of passion and a lot of feeling that in the majority of individuals that I had talked to had been fully vaccinated, and they felt very strongly that the city as an employer should be allowing them some sort of balance of time, because they're doing everything on their side as far as the vaccination is concerned to prevent a serious illness. And I think at the time that individuals were vaccinated, it was kind of thought that you were totally immune from getting COVID. And then the Delta variant has come in and changed that. And I think the last time that I'd heard is that you're, I think, 11 times less likely to be hospitalized or or death if you've been vaccinated. But it doesn't prevent you from getting it. And so there was a lot of passion about what is my employer going to do to help me out during these times. Not that they were looking at it from a standpoint of I don't want to work. Again, I've said this many times, I'm just amazed at the dedication of the individuals that work in this city. It was more of I've done everything that I can do. What do I do, to not spread this to my coworkers? And I've done everything that I possibly can. And so that's where some of the suggestions of being able to give them some sort of a balance and to allowing them to go in a negative balance and sick if that is necessary for them. And I think that's kind of where we're at, and I really want to open it up for the city council's discussion, direction, other thoughts. By no means is this set in stone or final. This was really trying to get something based upon your recommendation of doing a little bit more research and then at least preparing something that we could have more of a true dialogue on. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to the city council and for questions and answers and direction.
I think the policy itself, I mean, looks good. My only concern is the 80-hour bank leave. I just don't know how that will work in regards to, if you don't have, are you using it for sick leave? You got 80-hour extra sick leave then for a year? You know, if you're going home thinking you possibly might have COVID and you don't have COVID, are you able to use that 80 hours? Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, to me, it's a fine line between if you're sick and then using that, you know, or if you get COVID and using that. I think there's a difference. I'll turn it over to you, because you got the,
I've seen other institutions use the extra hours as to, you know, as an incentive for people to really monitor and as a way to really say, I am possibly sick, maybe haven't been part of an outbreak, I need to get tested, to do all the due diligence to protect their colleagues. And I think that that's an important thing to have, just so people aren't trying to hoard their sick time because maybe they're going to be pregnant and they need time off. But they really need, we are in a pandemic, and I think that there is some value to letting staff know if you need to do COVID-related things during this pandemic, that's okay.
And I agree with that, and that's where I was trying to talk a little bit about. It's actually kind of a cultural shift for many of us. I think we through the years have been more accustomed to go to work when we're sick. We're now being told, you know, really not to, because we don't want to expose our coworkers. And it's the same thing with, you know, the same philosophy on the vaccination. It wasn't just to vaccinate yourself, it was to vaccinate yourself to help your neighbors. And so if we, how this is written in the first part, if we are telling them, hey, if you have symptoms, you know, to stay home so you're not exposing others, well, then in a certain way, we're penalizing them by saying, yeah, you're staying home and you're using your own sick time for it. Here, it kind of, I look at it double down, it's a double down for the city and saying, we're not only telling you to stay home when you're feeling sick, but we're gonna help you out too to stay home, because we're gonna give you this leave balance to be utilized. And it's utilized only for COVID, and it's not a carryover. And what I mean by that is if you were to leave employment with the city, you don't get paid out for any time that's still in the balance. It's used and it's only for COVID related. And again, you know, we're trying to encourage our staff to protect themselves and to protect others. And it's the same thing with the vaccination. We're not going to the point and saying it's a mandatory, you need to be vaccinated if you're going to work in the city of North St. Paul. We're not going to that point. We're saying we're highly encouraging it. It's even written in there that if you haven't been vaccinated and you need to get vaccinated, or even if there's the booster, that the city will allow you to do that during work time, and you will be able to be paid your regular hours for that. To me, those are signs that as an employer, we are encouraging our staff to do this without going to the point and saying everybody has to do it.
Councilmember Thorson?
Just some thoughts. I mean, I personally don't, or I've never prescribed to the cultural shift idea that you go to work when you're sick. I mean, I've always just assumed that was a common sense thing. If you're sick, you don't go to work, because if you're sick, you could spread it to other people, whether it be a cold, the flu, strep throat, COVID now. So to me, this just kind of seems like it's a common sense thing. I understand, you know, during these times, they're unprecedented, at least for most people, never lived through something like this. It makes sense to have a policy specific to this. I'm just cautious about us taking an aggressive stance to encourage people to do things like wear masks and get vaccinations, or likewise discouraging them from doing those things because, you know, if I have a toothache, I go see a dentist. If I'm ill, I go see a doctor. I don't come down to the city to seek medical advice. And that's what our role should be, to steer people who have questions towards the qualified people who can give information that they can make the best decision. And, you know, I consult with a doctor. I don't consult with an elected official. And, you know, I guess a question that I had, when you say encouraging vaccinations, you know, this is, I'd say we're fairly early on, and this has been going on since March of 2020, basically, is when this all started. A vaccine was developed rather quickly. And at this point, we don't know long-term effects of the vaccine, correct? I mean, we can't test the effects of something that are gonna happen 5 years down the road. We have to wait. And so I would be concerned that if we're encouraging our employees to get a vaccine, and it turns out 3-4 years from now, there's widespread negative impacts from that, what do you think is gonna happen? They're gonna come back and say, well, the city told me to do this. So I think our stance should be, we encourage you to seek medical advice from a qualified medical professional. A doctor should be encouraging people to get vaccinated or not the city. That's just my opinion. Same with masks. I don't think we know the long-term effects of wearing masks for extended periods of time. I know there's been some studies that have come out. You know, we're talking a lot about the physical effects of this. I don't think there's been a lot of attention put on the mental aspects of it. And so, again, I just think we're best up. I acknowledge that we need to have a policy in place. It should be around encouraging people to seek information from qualified medical professionals. If they don't have insurance or a doctor, give them information where they can seek that, or, you know, religious or charitable organizations that offer that stuff, point them in those directions. Have our city policy. I mean, what would you say, about 95% of our employees are covered by a union? And there's only probably 4 people that aren't, right? The clerk, the manager, and the finance director, correct? I would imagine all these unions are covering this stuff pretty extensively as well. It's good to have overlap, but I mean, I think sometimes I guess an example I look at is how we initially reacted to closing the parks in March and April. I mean, for one, it was the winter. There's not a lot of heavy park usage, especially playground. But the simple act of putting a sign up saying the park is closed causes issues, right? There's people that get upset about it, you know, going on the playground equipment, someone seeing it, there's a sign that says no, they call the police. Now we're having more interactions with people when the intention is maybe not at the time, but now it's social distance, spread away, but now we're you know, by us doing something, we're causing unintended consequences, right? Some cities went to the extent of putting up fencing and spending tens of thousands of dollars. I'm glad we didn't do that. But, you know, I think just keeping an open mind and acknowledging that this is it's always changing and evolving. And I appreciate all the time you've put into this. I know I had a question, why is our finance director spending time into this COVID response? I said, well, we're a small city, and he's stepping up and helping, so I appreciate that and all the research you've done in laying this stuff out. But I think we should just, the middle of the road approach is fine with me. We should certainly steer clear of encouraging people to do one thing or the other, rather than, and just tell them, here's where you can get information and make the best decision for you, I think is the best course of action to take. And, in some instances, I'm not saying we not do anything, but this isn't necessarily something that we have to do something towards, other than just adopting a policy and trying to get people information.
Councilmember Peterson?
Dan, was that 80 hours, was that standard around the area, or did you just pull that out, or?
Well, the 80 hours actually was established last year by the federal government
Okay.
Underneath COVID.
Okay.
And so that ran out, I think, at the end of last year, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Are they, so that was a mandate, the 80 hours?
Correct.
And now that's gone,
Correct.
so it'd be above and beyond what we would be doing, adding another 80 hours to the employees. Are you saying that we'll be adding 80 hours to every employee then? Or people who don't have any banked hours?
So how I would look at this is that if you have, for the employees that were covered last year, if you have time that's left out of your 80 hours, and there actually was not a lot of time that was actually used out of the pandemic leave part to it. So there's a lot of employees that would still have the full 80 hours. There may be a couple that would not have the time available. They would end up then having to go to that negative balance. And then there's a number of new employees that have started that don't have.
Don't have any.
Leave. Yeah, so they would end up getting that 80-hour balance onto it.
City manager, do you have any thoughts to that?
Yeah, thank you. So me and Dan probably sat around for a couple hours one evening.
With a beer, I hope.
Well, I pulled the bottle out, but no. And more or less, we kind of gone over this plan, which he did a wonderful job putting this together, and I think middle of the road is a good comparison because I sat there and played devil's advocate for quite a while on different ways to do this, but I think it just kind of muddied the water. But we can go a lot of different angles with this, but I think the way that it was kind of brought up and allowing the people that, so what was there, 235 hours approximately that was, and of that 235 hours, 2 employees covered 160 hours of that needed it at the time. But there were probably another 300 and some hours, people that thought they might have been under that COVID-19, but it was just confusing. There were a lot of different questions and answers that weren't direct, they weren't written down on how to approach some of these things. So that time was actually put towards the employees' sick time. So, I mean, there's a little bit of liability with the city with that, but it does show the city's dedication to their employees as well. But that has to be taken into consideration, having, 55 people with 80 hours each. I mean, chances of that completely being used up is small, but it's a little bit of liability for the city for that. But I know it's certainly been appreciated for the people who have used it, and unfortunately, it was an employee that was just hired that ended up getting the COVID that didn't have any time with him. So certainly very much appreciated that we were able to give him, well, as of now, we've let him go negative. But that was another question that I might have had as well. So if you go ahead with this, can we go retro for the 2 cases that we've just had for COVID-19? I mean, or does that just muddy the water that if you start opening that up with these, what about somebody else who did it? So maybe it's not, that was me being the devil's advocate most of the time, and Dan's shooting me out of the water, so. But there's just, you can go many different angles on this, but probably just keeping it simple and to the point is probably the best for everybody involved.
And I'll go back to what the League of Minnesota Cities, city attorney Shayna, I know,
Mayor, members of council, so are you asking just what legally, I mean, legally, you have a lot of flexibility with this particular policy and what you see fit here. I would just mention in terms of the 80 hours of leave, that was a federal program. It did end last December of 2020, so there's no longer a requirement that the city provide that time. However, if you did wish to provide that time, the parameters could be identical to when we had the leave in place previously under the federal program. And we could certainly reference those documents that we created back when this was happening, back when the federal leave was happening. But essentially, to answer your earlier question about what if you think you have COVID, you're out because of that reason, but you haven't confirmed it yet, would you be eligible to use the leave? Under the previous federal program, you would be eligible as long as you could document that you were in fact experiencing the symptoms of COVID that made you honestly believe you had it, and then also seeking a medical diagnosis to confirm it was COVID. So there are a few parameters on it, but if you use, a day or two and you wait for your test to come back and it comes back negative, you'd still be entitled to use those 2 days under the federal leave program. Certainly, once you received your negative diagnosis, you would no longer be permitted to rely on that federal leave program. You would be able to take your regular sick time if you were still experiencing symptoms, certainly, or you could return to work safely if you've had the confirmed negative test, and if that's in line with the CDC and MDH guidance. So I hope that kind of answers some of the questions, but truly you do have a lot of flexibility as a city to decide what works best for the employees here and what you'd want to put in place. So you can give it, more thought or provide additional direction, and we can clarify things, whatever the council is comfortable with the policy. Thank you.
do you see other cities going back to the 80?
I have not personally seen that happen yet. Not to say that other cities are not doing that. It could just be that I'm not familiar with any of the cities who have chosen to do that, and it sounds like perhaps our finance director has more information on that.
Yes, Ramsey County has allowed individuals, if they still had a balance of those 80 hours, to continue to utilize that. And then instead of doing negative, they call it, an advance in your accrual. Essence, it's going negative. It's the same type of component with that. I am interested, since we've kind of thrown over to our attorney, there were 2 points that Councilmember Thorson had brought up regarding the mask wearing and the vaccination, the stance on that, and if there, I guess I look at it as if there potentially is, and there seems to always be potential, but is there potential exposure to the city if we were to be, highly recommending something and it finds out that the vaccine had some really adverse effects down 5 years from now?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of council. I mean, in my view, this is fairly new territory, so it's hard to say what may happen down the road. I would also say, just in general that, the city isn't, in this particular situation, acting without sort of the backing of the Minnesota Department of Health and the CDC. So certainly there are other agencies and other organizations involved who have vetted this from a scientific level and made advisory opinions as to what they see as best. So I don't really see the city as being, in the future, if this were to be a claim, I wouldn't see the city as a bad actor in this particular situation, given that they had a good faith basis to do so based on the CDC guidance and the Minnesota Department of Health guidance. So I don't see it as a strong liability issue for the city. since they are relying on those other agencies who have the scientific expertise to make those determinations. Thank you.
Councilmember Wong.
Yeah, so as for the mask, I actually would like to see something a little bit more, a little bit stronger in that regard. I think that if we're not asking people to declare their vaccination, which some would argue is a little bit more invasive. However, I don't believe masks compared to other preventative measures like testing or vaccines are as invasive, and we should really consider that as a first line of defense. Unfortunately, I think this communicable disease is at a point where it's cost the society, and the benefits of prevention outweigh the risks at this point. We see that the hospitals are full in Minnesota, and the National Guard is on deck to provide care and conserving care for those people who may have put off care, is plaguing our hospital system. So that's something we really need to consider. And that's why I think, having masks in place is the least invasive option. And we know that it can prevent disease, especially this respiratory disease that we're still frankly facing, especially here in the upper Midwest.
Can I ask a question about masking? So, I guess my concern, we can say wear a mask because, our opinion is that the science is that it helps prevent the spread. I saw someone at a gas pump drop their mask on the ground and pick it up and then put it back on their face. And they're touching it. If we're going to go to that extent, then we need to enforce proper mask wearing, cleanliness. What's the point of mandating a mask if it's not clean, And again, how do we do that? I pointed that out as an example before. The council chambers is spread out. We're social distanced, but there are several meetings where there's people standing shoulder to shoulder right behind. So if we're gonna do that, let's be consistent and say only 5 people can be in here, and we're only gonna have however many chairs spaced apart. So, it's just, again, I'm not trying to get into a debate here about whether or not one opinion is right or not, but I'm just saying it's hard to be consistent, and it's hard to take a stance as a city and say, well, we're gonna say wear a mask because that's helping, prevent the spread. But if someone isn't wearing their mask properly, or they're wearing the same mask for 4 months, what's that accomplishing? And again, why is that our role as the city to be playing doctor? They should be seeking that advice from a medical profession.
Unfortunately, it's not the doctor at this point. That's the one that people are going to. Prevention is where we need to really focus on. I don't want to see our staff stretched thin and out on leave because of COVID. Our staff are already stretched thin. That's another concern we need to think about. It's going to be in our benefit to look at this as the least invasive, the most preventative that we can do, so we don't lose out on staff who are already spread thin.
And I think having something in place, it's not 100%, it's not 100% foolproof. We're going to have instances where we might have more people in here. There might be somebody that's standing next to me 2 feet. But if those things are in place, at least it gives you some sort of security. Again, it's not 100%. I don't think we can go to that 100% of complete, you stand 6 feet away, you wear that mask and wash it every day. I mean, we can't tell people to do that, but I think having something in place at least helps. So, I don't know where we go with this, because I believe, I like the policy. I think the, encouraging, it's not mandating. We're not mandating anything, we're just encouraging. I think that follows CDC guidelines, Department of Health. I think it's, there's, I think we have all had people in our lives that have had it and have struggled with it, and it is real, and it's something that's not going away, tomorrow. But this is a very dynamic policy. I mean, this is something that changes every day, every week. We've been going through it for over a year now, and next week it could be different. I don't, that's the hard part about this, is that, and it's polarizing, all of us, of how do we deal with it. So I think having something in place, protecting our employees, I think it is beneficial for us.
So would you like to see stronger language on the mask component to it, or leave it where we're at today?
I think what you have is good, personally, for me, encouraging.
Okay.
I would like to see it stronger mandated.
I'm fine with what you have there, Dan. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I made my point pretty clear that, recommending is what you have here is sufficient.
Okay.
It's a starting point.
Okay.
I mean, I think, to me, that's where we gotta have something in place. And the 80 hours, I guess I'm okay with that. I mean, we are trying to protect our employees. We are a small town, and I hate to, yeah.
And to be clear, that's for people who still have time of that 80 hours left that have not used it. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah, I mean, all we can do is put our best foot forward to keep our employees safe, so.
Everybody okay with that?
And I do want one final piece to it is with the stronger language on the mask is something that, we may not do right now, but I think it's something that we need to consider.
Oh, yeah.
And it may be something that is brought up. Councilmember Wong brings up some excellent points, and I think coming from Ramsey County did an excellent job of educating the employees. There were countless videos on how to use your mask, how you were supposed to take your mask off, that you were supposed to clean it on a regular basis. And I think there's a lot of that information that's out there. I think one of the key elements that, to me, on the mask wearing wasn't necessarily the cleanliness, so to speak, of the mask itself. It was what it prevented from the droplets from you spreading to others, and vice versa. And so I do think that is, I don't want us to just forget that part to it. I think it's something we need to take into serious consideration, especially when we're looking at it from the standpoint, and Councilmember Wong had brought it up, and I brought it up earlier, is that we do not have the value of having a lot of staff out. And so even though we're encouraging by giving that 80 hours or the balance of that 80 hours, it may be that if we see the trend, at least even in our own organization, that we need to put that into play sooner than later.
Do we have still work from home? I mean, is there a policy in place that they could potentially?
Not currently an active policy, but there are some positions that could do that, but there are many positions throughout the city that wouldn't be feasible. But, Dan would be a good one to ask for some of his employees who, are behind a desk all day long and, might have that ability. But, my department or police, really, there's just some departments that couldn't do it.
Again, it's, this is very dynamic. If we get 3 or 4 people out, we got to do something.
Yeah, so I because in the finance department, we didn't go to the GFOA conference this year and so forth, that we have a little additional money. I have moved forward underneath my purchasing authority in order for laptops for the 4 individuals that do not have laptops into my space, to be able to allow them to be able to try to work from home. We still have a customer service component that we need to staff, which makes a bigger complication to it. But just walking into this organization not too long ago, I was a little bit surprised that we didn't learn some lessons from last year in trying to be able to make our workforce a little bit more flexible in our time. And part of that is rolling out laptops to those who can. And in addition, making sure, and we are moving there to make sure that applications that we have do reside in the cloud, that it's more accessible for our staff and individuals. But yes, I'm very concerned about it, because we have every employee that's on the finance side is key to making it go day in and day out. And if I were to lose 2, I would turn gray overnight. Yeah.
And I respect the council's, everyone's opinion. It's very hard, when it is such a kind of not polarized, but it's something that we're trying to work through another year, So I respect everyone's opinion, so.
Could I just say something?
Except for yours. No.
If, just to kind of give you an idea, so if we did have a situation where, a whole department was taken out shy of last year when we were doing cycling, crews in maybe half at a time, we do still have mutual aid as well that we can call in for worst-case scenarios. So we do have those plans in place.
Good. Okay, does that give you good direction? Thank you,
Yes,
everyone,
thank you.
for, it's a hard topic. And you got number 3, purchasing policy updates and annual training materials.
Turn it right over to Mr. Winnick.
Now, this item's a little bit more in the finance director's wheelhouse compared to the last one. So as I arrived here, one of the items that I had looked at was staff was already in the process of looking at the purchasing policy, and they were working with legal to make sure that we were in conformance with statutes and so forth, and just trying to tighten things up. I, in addition, reviewed it and looked at the purchasing policy. And for the most part, the policy that you had in place is very strong. There's the right amount of checks and balances and accountability that's established. There just needs to be a little bit kind of a stronger sense or feel from 2 components. One, that finance needs to be able to take more of an active role. I'll use the example of a credit card, that the finance can actually shut a credit card off for an individual if it's being misused or they're not following the policy. And so that has been changed. Right now, I'm the one who can authorize new individuals in getting a credit card, and if they're not in compliance, I can shut off their credit card myself. And it's really kind of making sure that we were consistent and that we had the appropriate forms. So we added a couple of different forms to the policy. And then I developed, based upon this policy, and if there's changes to it, I'll adjust. But then I developed a PowerPoint training material which I intend to, after the city council has made their suggestions and we come back with the final purchasing policy, that I plan to hold that training at first with the department heads and then whoever else needs to be. And really what I'm going to be emphasizing in that purchasing training is just the bottom line fundamental that I strongly believe in, that when we work in government, that we're held to a higher fiduciary responsibility than that exists in other places, and that we need to take that very seriously. And there are statutes that are in place for policies and procedures and bidding and making recommendations. And I think we need to make sure and hold ourselves higher than other areas that we are in compliance with that. And I think this policy does that. I think the training materials will be a good piece to help educate the department heads. And part of the reason is because we have a number of new department heads that have come in recently. And it's a good opportunity for them to have questions and answers also. And it's really for us to be on the same page. And I'm not seeing anything that's radically wrong or anything at this moment. I know with all of the department heads that are in place right now, there's great communication with the finance where they're, if they're not totally understanding what they need to do in the process, they'll come and ask finance for that advice. And I just want to kind of build that relationship and make sure that relationship is there, so they're not going out on their own. But I think the key piece to it is so much comes in front of the city council, and that's the way it should be. So it opens up that transparency. It's really more of communication and education for our own staff and employees, so that they're aware of what the policies are. But I didn't see anything that was terribly wrong. Again, the policy, some of the bigger highlights of changes that are in it, to be consistent with the Uniform Municipal Contracting Law. The third value purchase, it was at $10,000 to $19.99. It's up to $25,000, and then anything over $25,000 to the $175. So that's just to be in line with what the uniform code is. That was one of the bigger changes. The other big change with the credit card is that I will be the one who is overseeing the authority to that. I'm in a better position because we have to get the receipts and all the documentation. So if that's not being complied with, I can quickly, make adjustments and turn off a card if that's necessary for the individuals. And then it's really to strengthen the language because it's cited in a number of different places. And again, it's really coming off of statutes that any expenditure needs to be for a public purpose. And that if it isn't, that the individual who makes that purchase can be held liable for that purchase. And so that's being emphasized throughout the document. I think those are, and I'm going to ask legal here that helped greatly with developing these changes, if there was anything that I may have missed.
Nothing at this point. Thank you.
And so I know that City Council, this is the first time you've really got to see the changes. But if you have thoughts, areas that we need to change further, is this heading in the right direction? And then also if you can comment on the training materials themselves too.
Any, Councilmember Peterson?
I like that idea about the training. I think that's excellent. Then there's no question if there's comes a problem. Now with the new city manager coming on, that shouldn't be a problem. I mean, this is going to be in effect, and so be it, or
Correct. And
he'll
there,
probably have or he or she would have a credit card, I would assume, and then.
Absolutely, and I'll take it away from them too. No, I'm just, no, if they're in violation.
Let's be
But,
serious about this.
Yeah, no, seriously, and that's really kind of where the intent is. The rest of the document itself is really in line with state statute. There isn't anything that's going further. So I can't foresee that a city manager would change any of those components, because even the city manager authority, is dictated by state statute in addition, so we're, in compliance with all of that. And again, the transparency in a city, and especially this city, is great. I mean, everything is coming to the city council. So it's really more about making sure that we are communicating and educating our own employees. And then to be able to make sure that we have, at the end, that check and balance to be able to shut off people's authorities, if they're not in compliance.
Councilmember Thorson?
Yeah, just a couple of questions, since you have it up here I'll go to that first. It's about bottom, page 5, prohibited expenses. That last one in that first column, flowers. I know in the past, prior to us adopting this policy and it actually stating that, it was August of 2020, was it? Yeah. I mean, these guidelines still existed, we just didn't have them adopted, and it was cities, I think, past practices where it was common to purchase condolence flowers if a family member passed away of any city relation. And that's what they're referring to, is flowers of any, congratulatory flowers, congratulations on your baby, or condolences, not like landscaping flowers and things of that such. So if we can be more specific in that, I think that would be helpful. I know it says, kind of note, this is not a complete listing, but, I just want to make sure that it's well understood that the things that we can and can't be getting into here, and that there's no question over it. Other things are pretty self-explanatory there, and that's not to say we can't still purchase condolence flowers. It just needs to come from each individual personally, not from the city expenses. And then I think this is on page 7, charge accounts. We briefly touched on this before when we first had discussion about some modifications to this. And, I understand that in some instances it's appropriate to have a charge account, but being is that most everyone accepts credit cards nowadays, my concern is that not necessarily our employees, but someone from outside, like I can think the example I used was Home Depot. If we have a charge account at Home Depot, how can we have assurances that Home Depot is following their proper procedures, not allowing outside people to make charges on our city account? And I understand department heads review all those charges, but if they're running up, they're buying batteries, and someone else goes in and buys a battery, and it's not authorized, it might be hard to catch if the employees at these places where we have the charge accounts aren't asking for proper information, an ID or an account number, or a password, I don't know, whatever it is. But I believe, when I first inquired about this, it was stated, well, we don't think we have many. So if we don't have many and we can't control the risk, why do we even allow for it? Would it be appropriate to just say we're not going to engage in that activity? We're not going to put ourselves out there. We don't have charge accounts. We just use our credit cards, and that way we can assure you have to make the purchase. You have to physically have the card, versus me walking in there and saying, "Hi, I'm Brian. Charge this to the electric department." Oh, okay, I work for the city of North St. Paul. You're putting a lot of faith in whoever's employed at that place, to make the right decision to say, well, we're supposed to ask for your employee ID number, or whatever. So, what's your thoughts on that?
I definitely don't disagree with you on that. Right now with the charge account, there's a list of individuals who are authorized, but you're right, we are putting an onus on the vendor to play that buffer or that security component to it to make sure that they actually are and that they're checking IDs, and we can't guarantee that for sure. We do get, with your example of the Home Depot, we actually do get, that receipt. That receipt is sent to the department head. And so it really is, the onus is on the department head to make sure that that charge was legitimate, that an employee of theirs in the city of St. Paul and for a public purpose made that purchase. Could we tighten it up by having more credit cards? Absolutely. And I have been looking at that. Our current configuration of how the credit card that we currently have doesn't allow as much documentation as I would like to see onto it, but have reached out with the Premier Bank and looked at the possibility of getting a different type of credit card where we could actually have the individuals, do a screenshot of the receipt, and it basically is uploaded into that document, so we have that, and then there's a part, instead of just jumping right to it, is how do we, from a staff level, be able to maintain and control those credit cards and the receipts and the documentation that's needed to verify those purchases. Right now, the Home Depot example gives us the appropriate documentation, except for there is that hole there that, you brought up, and you're right, we can't 100% say that it was a city employee. We put that onus on the department head to be able to verify that component to it, that it was that was their staff. If we can get the credit card to be able to give us the documentation and make that not a labor intensive, and that labor intense comes from the finance side to it, then we would move towards that. So we are looking at that. And end of that long-winded part to it is we are looking at that to try to make it a little bit more tighter.
Because what's the advantage of having a charge account? Do they offer discounts? I mean, we still pay those accounts off monthly anyway, correct?
Correct.
So, I mean, it just seems like, again, it's an unnecessary risk if we're saying, we have X amount of credit cards issued to specific individuals. When those cards are used, it's under that individual's name. If they ever hand the card off to someone else to use it, there's a form that needs to be filled out, an explanation as to why. If we have an account open at, Bill's hardware store, and throughout the day, every public works employee has authorization to go in and make charges on the city, it just seems like it's more of a convenience thing versus a secure thing. Like, no, if you want to make a charge, this person does it. And outside of getting some sort of discount by having an open charge account, I'm assuming a lot of these charge accounts we probably pay with a credit card. So I just don't understand the need of having a charge or an open account with.
I guess we have the Public Works Director here. He's the one that probably uses it the most, or the reason why. Ron, maybe if you can explain if there's a need for it or not a need for it, and.
I would like to comment on that if I could, please.
Yep.
And I wholeheartedly disagree with, since the credit cards, since the issues that we've had in the past, they have made now a one-page form that they want you to fill out if you're going to make a charge on a credit card. So now, I mean, I might make, and Ron as well, 8, 10 or more purchases a month. So you're filling out that form every time you do that. It's not a simple, you could put all your charges on one form and make it simple. It's not how it was set up. I've worked for the city for 22 years, 21 of those years have been in management, and I can count on two hands probably issues that we've had with charge accounts that make it easier for employees to go out there and make a purchase, whether or not it's for batteries or what have you, for the jobs that they're out there, as opposed to carrying around a city credit card with them all the time that people lose wallets, the number gets out there that make charges on. And since I've had my credit card, the one time on a month, locksmith fee was from, I think Kentucky was put on there one month. I mean, took it off right away, but it just makes a vulnerability for that. I think that this is a solution looking for a problem. I think that the way it's set up right now actually works rather well, whether or not it's Home Depot, Menards, and I agree that, yeah, could they do some more steps? I mean, I went in there and purchased over $500 worth of material. They didn't even ask to see my ID. All they do is swipe my credit card.
That's what I'm asking. I'm not trying to put erroneous issues on anyone. My question is, what assurances do we have that unauthorized users aren't using it? And I understand a lost credit card. I mean, it happens. I mean, I've had fraudulent charges on my cards. I've never lost my card. So people have the ability to, there's data breaches and it happens, years down the road. My concern is, just that what I stated before. What assurances do we have that these vendors are properly ensuring that outside people aren't making charges on our card? And then we're putting the reliance on the department heads, to catch that. And if they don't, then it's on them to reimburse the city, and they didn't even do it. I mean, I
would just comment on that, and Menards is where that could possibly happen. Home Depot, you have your own card. So that, so if one of my employees charges something there at Home Depot, it comes through, it has their name on it, it has their chart, they have their card. Someone would physically need that card in order to charge on that. Menards is a charge account. You go in there, you give them a code, they put that, you say, hey, Ron, here's the code. They put that on there. Yeah, someone behind you, if they heard that code, or if they, that's where they could put something on there, where that would be different. But I agree with Brian as far as giving each one of these guys a city credit card, or just a few people. There's no way that we could, Brian and I, or even, myself or Randy or our supervisors could go buy all the different things that we need to do while they're doing the job. I think Menards would be the only place that we'd have to kind of look into doing something to what you're speaking of. How is it that someone else, if someone else could go up there and just a random person could charge something on our account? Home Depot, there's no way unless they physically had our credit card or that employee's credit card. So.
Which is safer than having a card that you could use absolutely anywhere with a regular
Right.
credit card.
I would, to me as a department head, I'd be more worried about that and trying to track all of that than what I do right now. 99.9% I know pretty much before they're buying it what they're getting. They'll be like, hey, Ron, we're going to be doing this concrete project. We got to go buy wood and screws. And I put notes, screws to repair a mailbox, when I coded the receipt. So I get what you're saying about, the Menards things. If they're, hey, here's our code, here's the charge, they're supposed to check an ID, for that, the cashier, but you're putting it on the cashier. Cashiers get to know people, they don't ask for an ID, and going in there and getting that stuff, where you're not physically handing them a card with Ron Ritchie on it at Menards. But Home Depot, that's...
Typically, it's two accounts, Menards and Home Depot.
Yeah, there were two separate, yeah.
You're not talking many different accounts.
No,
You're
and
talking-
we can, you could purchase because you have a Home Depot credit card with your name on it, you could buy at any Home Depot. It wouldn't matter what Home Depot, but Menards were authorized to buy at the Maplewood one and the Oakdale one. There's a different code for each one of those stores, but you physically don't have a card for that. So
in terms of implementation, it sounds like there are different procedures for different vendors. So maybe having some sort of consistent agreement that if we go to this store or whatever store, that the protocol and procedure is the same on our end and on theirs. And that's the agreement we go on to make this account work. Would that be fair?
Those are corporate decisions that are made on their level, that, not that we set the standards for them to say, this is what you need to do for, like if they have a card, like we have a code for one, we have a card for another one. We didn't ask them for that. That was their standard that they said, this is what you need to do to purchase here for that. So I don't know that we could lay down that rule for them per se.
But it's definitely something we can have a conversation with them and make it as strong as we possibly can. Yes.
And I understand too that this is a high priority, you know, you guys are on to the credit cards now. I mean, you're afraid to possibly use a credit card at some point.
Yeah, I am.
I mean, that's
Very, very diligent. I mean,
correct. So I think we are looking at it differently than it was looked at a year ago.
Absolutely. No, time that I've been here, again, I think everybody does an absolutely superior job. There really is just some minor modifications. And, I just took the control of the credit cards. That's just my own personal preference to have that and that. And then I just really think that the real big key to it is training. It's communication. It's emphasizing these components. And I mean, you just heard from Ron, and Ron, I mean, he just displayed. He's conscientious. He knows what's going on. I mean, he's not letting something fraudulent happen. But Councilmember Thorson, are there things that we can look at to strengthen things? Absolutely. And I haven't eliminated the potential of having credit cards for more than just the department heads. It's just underneath the current system that we're using, it becomes very, very cumbersome. And the only way that we can really control it today is by having a limited number. And then you heard from our interim city manager, Brian, where there's a form that needs to be filled out. So now we've made it very prohibitive, or not totally prohibitive, but very cumbersome for their staff to be able to do their job and to get supplies that are needed. So it's a balancing act that we're still looking at, but I think this takes us leaps and bounds to where we were at. And again, I think the biggest emphasis on here is the training component to it, because your policy was pretty well set already. It's just making sure that it's being adhered to, and I think that goes a long way with the training.
We're past 6:30, so I want to kind of wrap it up here. Anything else, Dan, or?
No, I'm good with it. I will make a clarification on the flowers we'll put a note in there, and then I intend to bring this on November 3rd for city council approval, and then I will start to establish a training date for staff.
November 2nd?
I'm sorry, it is the 2nd.
Anything else? City manager? Nothing? Okay, motion to adjourn
So moved.
by Councilmember Wong, second by Councilmember Peterson. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We'll adjourn for a couple minutes to switch over the feed on the TV. Zoom.